I took over my dad's $3 million company because he said I'd never be a real man. That line has echoed in my head every day for the past 9 months. Ever since I walked into his office and laid the buyout papers on his desk. The same desk where I once sat, 8 years old, legs dangling off the chair while he barked orders over the phone, laughing with clients, commanding a room without raising his voice. My dad, Richard Madsen, was the kind of man who carried weight without ever having to throw it around. He didn't teach. He expected. You either figured it out or you were weak. And in his eyes, I was always weak. When I was a kid, he never hit me, but his words could cut steel. I remember once, in 7th grade, I cried after losing the science fair. I'd stayed up for 3 nights straight building this elaborate hydraulic bridge, only to watch it collapse during the demo. He picked me up from school, silent the whole ride, then parked the car, turned to me, and said, "Real men don't cry over losing. They rebuild." I was 12. He never once asked if I was okay. Mom used to balance him out. Soft voice, gentle hands, always ready with a warm smile and cold lemonade. But she died young. Cancer. I was 16. After that, it was just him and me. No buffer. He ran Madsen Industrial Solutions like a military base. And I was his private. I swept floors, stacked pallets, restocked shelves, cleaned tools. All through college, every summer, every winter break. And when I graduated with honors, degree in mechanical engineering, he shook my hand like I was a client. "You earned it," he said, then added, "Let's see if you can do something with it." That was his way of saying, don't get comfortable. The thing about my dad, he never really saw me. Not as a man, not as a peer, not even as a son half the time. I was just another body in his operation. Useful, as long as I didn't ask for anything. So I stopped asking. I started staying late, running reports, learning logistics. I shadowed his CFO without being told. Took accounting night classes in secret. I watched how he made decisions, how he negotiated. And I waited. Waited for the day he'd finally see me. That day never came. Instead, 4 months ago, we had dinner at his club. One of those mahogany, scotch-heavy places full of men who say things like the market and the good old days. I wore a suit I could barely afford, thinking maybe, finally, he'd offer me a seat at the executive table. Instead, after 2 bourbons, he leaned back and said, "You're good, son. Better than I expected. But you don't have it in you to lead. You're too soft. You think too much. Real men make the hard calls." That was the night something cracked open in me. I smiled, paid the bill, and made 3 phone calls on the walk home. 1 to his silent partner, 1 to the bank, and 1 to my lawyer. I didn't sleep for the next 6 weeks. I reviewed every document, built a portfolio of his liabilities. I learned the value of every truck, every contract, every patent. I mapped out the future of the company. I found the weak links, the cracks he refused to see. And when the time was right, I offered to buy him out. At first, he laughed. "You want a what?" Then he got quiet, asked for my numbers, reviewed them, twice, called in his lawyer. 3 weeks later, I sat across from him in the boardroom. Same suit, new posture, my signature already dry on the purchase agreement. His pen hovered for a full minute before he finally signed. He didn't say congratulations, didn't even shake my hand. He stood up, looked at me like I was a stranger, and said, "Guess you finally learned how to grow teeth." Then he left, and I became CEO of Madsen Industrial. But if you think that's where the story ends, you're wrong. Because 3 months later, I found something buried in the books. Something that could destroy the company. Something my father had been hiding for years. And now I have to decide, do I protect his legacy? Or do I burn it to the ground? Because if I choose wrong, everything I just fought for could vanish overnight. And worse, I might finally become the man he always said I was. It started with a number that didn't make sense. I was reviewing the Q4 logistics report, just routine stuff. Shipments in, shipments out, margin deltas, freight costs. I'd read thousands of these over the years. I knew the shape of them, the rhythm. But this one-line item kept showing up where it shouldn't. Consulting fees, Southern Tier Ops. Southern Tier wasn't even operational. My dad shut that division down in 2019, or so he claimed. Said the contracts were bleeding red, and he didn't want dead weight on the books. But here it was, $12,780 monthly. Regular as clockwork. Traced back 2 years. Quiet. tucked into the tail end of operating expenses like a fly in a bowl of soup. I called accounting, asked for the vendor file. The guy on the other end hesitated just long enough to make me curious. "That's one of Mr. Madsen's legacy accounts," he said. "Is the vendor active?" "Still getting paid, yeah." "For what?" A pause. Well, there's no SOW. "So we're paying someone 12 grand a month for nothing?" "I just processed the wires, sir." I hung up. Then I drove straight to the server room and pulled the archived files myself. I didn't trust anyone. Not yet. It took 2 days of digging. PDFs nested inside spreadsheets. Invoices with half-blurred routing numbers. The deeper I went, the more it stank. The vendor was a shell. Registered in Delaware. Same state my father kept one of our silent subsidiaries. Only one name attached. Wallace Drexler. I hadn't heard that name in over a decade. Back when I was 22, Wallace was my father's fixer. Not an official title, but everyone knew. If a machine failed OSHA standards, Wallace handled it. If a contractor got too nosy, Wallace smoothed it over. If a bribe needed delivering, Wallace made it disappear into consulting lines and travel reimbursements. Then, one day, Wallace just vanished. Word around the office was that he retired rich and silent. But apparently, he never left. He'd been getting paid for years. Quietly. No deliverables. No oversight. Just a monthly siphon. And that wasn't even the worst part. I kept digging. Because now, I had to know. And that's when I found the environmental audit. A report dated April 2018. Stamped, confidential, in red. Filed under a dummy tag. It detailed illegal dumping. Industrial waste. A site just outside of Waterville, barely fenced. Water contamination. Soil toxicity. The whole damn thing signed off by a local inspector who was later let go. I stared at the document, so long my coffee went cold. Madsen Industrial had been poisoning a local water supply. And someone had paid to bury the report. Someone named Wallace Drexler. Under direct authorization from Richard Madsen. My father. It wasn't a mistake. It was policy. He'd ordered it. Funded it. Hid it. Kept it off the books with Drexler as the middleman. And if I hadn't stumbled on a vendor line, it might have stayed buried forever. I sat alone in my office that night. Lights off. Just the city blinking outside. And I asked myself a question I never thought I'd ask. Was I now responsible for his sins? Because legally, maybe not. But morally? I was the CEO now. And this company had poison in its roots. What I did next would define everything. I had 2 options. Expose it all, call the EPA, notify the board, eat the fallout. Or bury it deeper. Protect the company, the jobs, my repo. I didn't report it. Not that night. Not the next day. I told myself I needed time to think, to plan, to weigh the consequences. But the truth? I was scared. Because exposing it meant blowing up everything I had just taken over. The company. The jobs. My own credibility. I ran through every outcome like a man playing chess against himself. If I went public, the EPA would gut us. Lawsuits would pour in. Clients would vanish overnight. Shareholders would revolt. Our brand, our contracts, our future, ash. But if I stayed quiet, I'd be protecting my father's sins. Participating in them. Letting poison sit under my name. I couldn't breathe. I went home that night and poured 2 fingers of bourbon. Sat on my balcony. Watched the skyline like it held an answer. It didn't. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done since college. I drove to see my Uncle Roy. Roy was my mom's brother. Worked the docks his whole life. Retired early, lives out by the water. He never had kids. Never remarried. But he was the only person who ever looked my dad in the eye and didn't blink. He opened the door and said, "Jesus, you look like you haven't slept since Tuesday." "Try April," I muttered. He poured coffee. Sat me down. Waited. I told him everything. The books. Drexler. The audit. The site in Waterville. Roy didn't interrupt once. Just nodded, eyes heavy, jaw working like he was chewing through every word. When I was done, he exhaled slow. "You want me to tell you to cover it up?" he asked. "No. I don't know what to do." He sipped his coffee. "You ever see a house eaten from the inside out by termites? Looks fine from the street. Paint's clean. Windows straight. But inside, rot. You touch the wall, and your finger goes through." I nodded. "That's what this is," he said. "You didn't build the rot. But now you own the house. So the question is, do you sell it and let someone else find the holes, or do you tear down the walls yourself?" I looked at him. "That easy, huh?" Hell no, Roy said. But it's honest. I drove back in silence. No music, just road and thoughts. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with our general counsel. Brought in 2 senior board members I trusted. Laid everything out. Full transparency. You should have seen their faces. One of them, Paul Tran, a man who'd worked under my dad for 20 years, actually turned pale. The other, Ms. Alvarez, asked one question. How long have you known? I swallowed. For days. She nodded. Believed me. Somehow, that mattered more than I expected. The lawyer went full damage control mode. If we self-report, we might negotiate a reduced penalty. But make no mistake, this is going to be a storm. How bad? I asked. He didn't sugarcoat it. Waterville's proximity to public water systems is a nightmare. Class action lawsuits. Media exposure. Possibly criminal liability. You'll be tied to it no matter what. Even if the origin predates your tenure. My voice was steady when I answered. Then we do it. We tell them. Everything. The silence that followed was long. Heavy. Respectful. Then Ms. Alvarez stood. Get ahead of it. Let it. That's your only shot. And just like that, the path was set. I called the EPA myself. Filed the documents. Authorized the release of the internal audit. By the end of the week, local media had picked it up. Whistleblower CEO reveals hidden toxic dump site was the headline. They called me brave. Foolish. A traitor to my father. A savior to the town. And my phone lit up like a fire alarm. Half the board wanted me gone. The other half said I saved the company's soul. But the worst call of all came from a number I hadn't seen in months. My father. He didn't yell. Didn't curse. He just said, you didn't have to ruin me to prove a point. And before I could say anything, he hung up. That night, I stood in the same office where I'd once dropped the buyout papers. Looked out at the city. And whispered, I didn't ruin you. You did that all by yourself. But even saying it aloud didn't make it feel better. Because legacies don't die clean. And some ghosts refuse to stay buried. The backlash came faster than I thought. By Monday morning, the phones at corporate were ringing nonstop. Angry clients, concerned vendors, journalists sniffing for a quote. The press painted me as both a hero and a traitor, depending on the hour. Our largest contractor pulled out by noon. By 3 p.m., the mayor of Waterville called for a public investigation. By Tuesday, our stock price was down 17%. And by Friday, the board called an emergency vote on whether I should remain CEO. Paul Tran fought for me. So did Ms. Alvarez. But the old guard, the ones who'd been loyal to my father for decades, saw me as an infection. You don't destroy your own blood to look good, one of them said. He didn't destroy blood, Alvarez snapped. He cleaned out a tumor. It came down to a tie. And the tiebreaker? The swing vote from our newest member, a finance guy named Keller who barely knew me. He stared at me across the table for a long moment before speaking. Your father built an empire, he said. You just set it on fire. Then he turned to the board. But I'd rather trust a man who burns truth into the open than one who buries poison in the walls. Vote passed. I stayed. But barely. That night, I drove to Waterville. I needed to see it for myself. Not the audit. Not the drone shots. The land. It was worse than I imagined. The dumping site sat behind what looked like an abandoned steel yard. Rusted gates, sagging chain link, patches of dirt where nothing grew. The air smelled like burnt rubber and copper. I stood there, boots in the soil my company had poisoned. And I saw them. Kids. 3 of them. Kicking a soccer ball near the chain link fence. I felt sick. The cleanup had already started. But it wouldn't be fast. Wouldn't be clean. Some wounds don't close. They just scar over. I spent the next month in triage mode. Crisis teams. PR firms. Environmental engineers. We hosted public forums. I sat in gymnasiums with angry citizens yelling in my face. I didn't deflect. I didn't dodge. I just listened. One man, maybe 70, stood up and said, my grandson swims in that creek every summer. You gonna explain to him why his bones ache now? I looked him in the eyes and said, yes, sir. I will. And we'll cover his care and everyone else's. No exceptions. No lawyers. No NDAs. No backroom deals. If we were going down, we were going down clean. But the real surprise came 6 weeks later. An envelope arrived at my desk. No return address. Inside, a USB drive. And a note, typed in courier font. I always kept copies. WD. Wallace Drexler. I plugged it in, fully expecting malware. But what I found instead made everything else look like child's play. Offshore accounts, bribes to regulators, falsified safety reports from as far back as 2006, and names. Lots of them, including mine. Or rather, my forged signature. Turns out, Richard Madsen had been prepping for this moment for years, creating a paper trail that made it look like I'd been part of it from the start. It wasn't just his legacy he wanted to protect. It was his alibi. And now, with Drexler's files, I had proof. Proof that my father hadn't just broken laws. He'd broken me into the crime. Now it was personal, and I was done protecting ghosts. It's one thing to uncover the truth. It's another thing to weaponize it. I spent 3 days combing through the Drexler files. Thousands of documents, spreadsheets, email threads, scanned contracts, even photos. Some of them looked like they were taken from inside conference rooms I'd never seen. And they all pointed in one direction. Richard Madsen had built his empire not just on steel and contracts, but on cover-ups, bribes, falsified inspections, and threats. And now I had his blueprint. But going public again, that would bring the whole company down. Not just lawsuits, but indictments. The federal kind. So I made a call. Not to a journalist. Not to the feds. To someone who owed me a favor. Marshall Quinn, federal investigator. We met years ago, back when I interned at a regulatory agency. I helped him out of a bind once, found a buried code violation that saved a federal case. I sent him a message. You need to see this. Not official. Not yet. He showed up 2 days later. No badge. No tape recorder. Just 2 black coffees and a look that said he already knew this was going to get ugly. We sat in my office, lights low. I slid the drive across the table. You sure you want to show me this? He asked. I don't want to be part of this, I said. But I already am. And you need to know what he did. He plugged it in. Watched. Read. Took notes. When he looked up, his voice was flat. If I act on this, it doesn't stop at him. This implicates a dozen people. Maybe more. Your board. Your suppliers. Even city officials. I nodded. I know. And you? I can prove the signatures were forged. I have time-stamped files from before I even joined the executive team. He nodded slowly, then said, I'll need something bigger. Something real-time. That's when the idea hit me. Drexler. He was still alive. Still watching. That USB drive wasn't just a handoff. It was a signal. He wanted me to find him. I ran a skip trace. Nothing in his name. But he had a pattern. Mid-tier hotels. Prepaid phones. Habitual anonymity. One night, around 11:30 p.m., I drove to a dingy motel off Route 6. The kind of place you only stay in if you're hiding. Room 214. I knocked once. No answer. Then again. Finally, the door cracked. Wallace Drexler hadn't aged well. Gray stubble. Eyes like old glass. One hand trembling around a cigarette. Took you long enough, he rasped. I stepped inside. He shut the door. Turned to me. You ready to bury your old man? I didn't answer. He poured us each a shot of something that smelled like regret. Then he pulled out a folder. Insurance, he said. In case Madsen ever came for me. Now it's yours. Inside were recordings. Meetings. Phone calls. Video of my father authorizing the dumping in Waterville. Another clip of him signing off on a bribe. Why now? I asked. He lit his cigarette, fingers trembling. Because the bastard was planning to pin it all on you. And because somewhere in all this, you still looked like you were trying to do the right thing. And you? I stopped believing in right things a long time ago. But you? Maybe you still got one good move left. I left the motel with the folder in my hand and a pit in my stomach. Because Drexler was right. One good move. Just one. And if I played it wrong, everything I tried to fix would burn with it. The folder never left my sight. I kept it in a fireproof safe at my apartment, not the office. I scanned every page. Backed it up twice. Stored copies on a drive taped behind a loose panel in my closet. Because once you have something that powerful, something that could burn half a city's corruption to the ground, you sleep differently. That week, I scheduled a second meeting with Marshall Quinn. This time, I didn't just hand him files. I gave him names. These 3 execs signed off on every quarterly report hiding the Drexler payouts. This supplier doctored invoices. This city official rubber-stamped permits that never should have cleared. He didn't flinch. How many of these people are still active? All of them. He closed the folder slowly. This isn't just Madsen Industrial. This is systemic. Exactly. You're blowing up your own company. No, I said. I'm finally making it mine. Quinn gave me a deadline. If you want to stay clean, we need cooperation agreements. Testimony. Witness statements. You in or out? I'm in. What followed was a whirlwind. Secret recordings. Anonymous interviews. Staff who thought they could lie to me in the morning and not get fired by lunch. And then came the board meeting. I walked in with a locked briefcase. 8 members at the table. 5 who'd backed my father through everything. Paul and Alvarez were the only ones I trusted. Keller, the swing vote, looked like he hadn't slept. Before we begin, I said, I have something to share. I opened the briefcase, pulled out copies of Drexler's recordings, dropped one in front of each board member. You'll want to listen to these before the press gets hold of them. What is this? One of them asked, frowning. Proof, I said, of how deep this rabbit hole goes. And your names? Some of them are in it. Gasps. Raised voices. Accusations. Alvarez stood and slammed a folder down. I've already listened to mine, she said. I'm not in it. And neither is Paul. You're bluffing, another said. Try me, I said. Because in about 48 hours, the Department of Justice won't be. Silence. And then, one by one, the masks cracked. Excuses. Justifications. Please. I didn't know what he was really doing. He said it was a one-time fix. We were trying to keep the company alive. I didn't respond. Just stared. Because none of them cared when the water poisoned kids. None of them flinched when people got sick, or workers got paid late, or contracts got laundered through shell accounts. They only cared now that their hands were caught in the fire. The vote was swift. 5 resignations. 2 temporary suspensions pending investigation. 1 board seat revoked by unanimous consent. Keller stayed. Paul was named acting chairman. Alvarez took over compliance. And I remained CEO. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt scorched. That night, I found myself sitting in the old factory yard behind headquarters. The one where I used to haul scrap metal during college summers. Alone. The wind smelled like rust and oil. And for the first time in months, I let myself cry. Not because I lost anything, but because I finally understood what it meant to win something real. Not applause, not revenge, but integrity. And that kind of victory? It costs more than anyone tells you. 2 weeks after the board purge, the subpoenas landed. I was served in my driveway at 6:42 a.m. Federal seal. Case number. Grand jury proceedings. Even though I knew it was coming, the feel of that envelope in my hand still made my stomach twist. The next day, the DOJ unsealed the investigation. Environmental crimes, corporate fraud, conspiracy to obstruct justice. The news spread like fire. Matson Industrial became the headline. Not because of the crimes, but because of the confession. The CEO who came clean, who turned the company in, who had the audacity to torch his father's empire in the name of decency. I was either a whistleblower or a traitor, depending on who you asked. Anonymous death threats. Protesters outside HQ. Clients pulling contracts one by one. But you know what surprised me most? The letters. Dozens of them. From Waterville. From people who'd lived with the poison water. From mothers and teachers and steel workers. One note I still carry in my wallet. You did what no one else had the guts to. Thank you. M. Calderon. Some days, that was the only thing that kept me upright. Then, just when I thought I could breathe, the knock came. Not at my office. At my apartment. A soft knock. Too soft. I opened the door to find my father. Thinner. Grayer. Holding a cheap umbrella even though the sky was clear. Can we talk? He asked. I didn't answer. Just stepped aside. He walked in like he didn't recognize the place. Or maybe like he expected to never see it again. We sat. I didn't offer him coffee. They're going to indict me, he said flatly. They should. He winced, but not like he disagreed. More like it finally hit him. You didn't have to go this far, he said. You forged my signature. I was trying to protect you. No, you were protecting yourself. Silence. Thick. Old. Weighted by years of everything we never said. Then he said the one thing I never expected. I was wrong about you. That stopped me cold. I spent your whole life trying to make you hard enough to survive me, he said. Turns out, you were strong enough to outlive me. It wasn't strength. It was choice. He nodded slowly. They're going to want me to testify against you, I said. I know. And I will. He didn't flinch. Just tell the truth, he said. That's more than I ever did. He stood to leave. Looked around one more time. This place is quiet. Yeah, it's mine. At the door, he paused. You ever think about changing the name? Every day. He nodded once. Then do it. Don't carry my coffin with your future. And then he left. No hug. No apology. But maybe, just maybe, something close to peace. 3 days later, he turned himself in. The day after that, I walked into the Secretary of State's office and filed new papers. Madsen Industrial was officially dissolved. Reborn under a new name. Steel River Works. Same hands. New code. No ghosts. Just work worth doing. And a future no longer borrowed from someone else's sins. 6 months later, the headlines changed. The DOJ wrapped its investigation. 8 indictments. 3 guilty pleas. My father among them. He got 5 years in federal prison. Minimum security. No deals, no favors. He refused to name anyone else. I respected that, in a strange way. It was the first time he took the fall for something he actually did. The media frenzy died down. Protesters disappeared. And the real work began. Steel River Works wasn't just a new name. It was a new system. We rebuilt from the ground up. Hired transparency auditors. Made every safety report public. Created a whistleblower fund. Raised wages for the line workers. Cut bonuses for the execs. It hurt. Profit margins dropped. But trust went up. Investors called me crazy. One pulled out on principle. But something wild happened. New partners came in. Ethical ones. Small manufacturers. Local governments. Clients who gave a damn. We didn't just survive. We grew. Not fast. Not flashy. But clean. Waterville became our testing ground. We poured funds into cleanup, filtration, medical support. Built a community center. Offered jobs to anyone laid off during the collapse. Some told me they'd never forgive us. And that was fair. Forgiveness isn't owed. But one afternoon, a little boy ran up to me at a local event. Said, "You helped fix the water. Mom said I can drink from the sink again." That one sentence made every sleepless night worth it. And still, the past doesn't vanish. I get letters from my father once a month. Typed. Formal. Sometimes about books he's reading. Sometimes about the birds outside his cell window. Never about the company. Never about the crimes. But last week, he broke the pattern. The letter was only 2 sentences long. I used to think legacy was what you left behind. But I see now, it's what you choose not to carry. No signature. No return address. Just those words. I folded it and placed it next to my mother's photo on the mantle. Because he was right. For the first time, I'm not standing in someone else's shadow. I'm standing on solid ground. And maybe, just maybe, I finally became the man I was supposed to be. Not by surviving my father, but by refusing to become him. A year to the day after I filed the papers to dissolve Madsen Industrial, I stood on a stage in Waterville. It wasn't fancy, just the town hall gym. Folding chairs. Fluorescent lights. The air smelled like popcorn and floor polish. But the place was packed. Kids. Parents. Workers in Steel River hoodies. The mayor. Teachers. Nurses. People who, a year ago, wanted nothing to do with us. I was there to hand out the first round of community scholarships. 10 kids. Full rides. STEM, trade school, whatever they wanted. No strings. We called it the Clean Start Fund. I held the mic, looking out over the crowd, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Pride. Not the kind my father chased. Not legacy or control. Something quieter. Realer. I told them, this isn't a fix. This isn't a trade. This is us finally doing what should have been done from the beginning. Investing in you. Applause. Some people stood. Not everyone. But enough. Afterwards, a woman approached me. Gray hair. Hard eyes. She didn't smile. My husband used to work at the Waterville plant, she said. He got sick. Didn't make it. I nodded, throat tight. You can't bring him back. But you showed up. And you didn't run. She handed me an envelope. This was his. I think he'd want you to have it. Inside was a photo. Black and white. My father and her husband, 20-something, grinning in front of a truck with the old Madsen logo. He believed in this company, she said, before it lost its way. So did I said quietly. She nodded once, then walked away. That night, I went home and pinned the photo next to my mother's and that letter. Not to romanticize the past, but to remember the cost of forgetting it. The world keeps turning. We landed 2 new contracts that quarter. Partnered with an engineering school to create a co-op program. Turned a small profit for the first time in 18 months. But more than that, people stopped looking at me like a cautionary tale. They started looking at me like a leader. Not perfect, not untouchable, just someone who chose the harder road. Someone who decided that breaking the cycle was worth the fallout. And when people ask me now, how did you survive it all? I tell them the truth. I didn't survive it. I built something after it. And sometimes, that's even harder. But it matters more. Because that's what legacy really is. Not the empire you inherit, but the future you choose to build when no one's watching. I didn't expect the last chapter to feel so quiet. No fanfare. No breaking news. Just a Tuesday morning at 7:13 a.m., sitting on my porch with a black coffee and the sound of birds waking up the trees. It's been almost 2 years now. Steel River Works is stable. Not thriving in the way Wall Street means it, but solid. Respected. We've weathered the audits, survived the transitions, and grown into something that feels honest. I walk the floor twice a week. No corner office. Just steel-toed boots and rolled-up sleeves. People don't flinch when I pass by anymore. They nod. Talk to me like I'm one of them. Because I am. Last month, we launched a mentorship program. The kid I got paired with? Bright. Scrappy. Reminds me too much of me at 19. He asked me why I never talk about my dad. I told him the truth. Because the story isn't about him anymore. He nodded. Didn't push. That night, I found myself digging through old boxes. Ones I hadn't opened since the first takeover. Inside, the original Madsen Company ledger. Faded ink. Dad's handwriting, sharp and efficient. I traced my finger down the names of the first 10 employees. Half of them were still alive. 2 were still with us. The next morning, I called a staff meeting. Not a corporate one. A real one. In the factory. No suits. No slides. Just me. I held up the ledger. This company started with 10 people and an idea. It lost its way. I won't pretend otherwise. But we found something better than pride. We found purpose. Then I handed the book to our youngest hire. You write the next page. He looked stunned. Everyone clapped. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was finishing something. I felt like I was witnessing the beginning. I still get letters from my father. His sentence ends next year. Maybe we'll speak. Maybe we won't. But I'm no longer waiting for that moment to heal me. I've learned something more powerful than forgiveness. Accountability. And the strange, quiet peace that comes from finally standing on your own. No shadows. No ghosts. Just a name you chose. A future you earn. And a story that belongs, at last, to you.